this video, I'll show you how you can transparently use the Django messaging framework with HTMX. I'll use this minimalistic application as an example. As we will see, this solution only needs a very simple Python middleware with a few lines of JavaScript and a slight modification of the HTML template. This video is a follow-up to my two previous videos on Django and HTMX, but you can watch it independently. Let's jump right in. I'll start by showing you the original project that we'll be working on in this video. This is a regular Django project. So far, no HTMX, it's just pure classic Django using the messaging framework. So let me present this project to you. If you click here on this button, it will show a message like this. Let me show you how it is in VS Code. So we have here a project folder with the settings and the URLs as usual. We only have two URLs, the root one, which points to the home view, and another one, message, which will be the one that triggers the message. Let me show that to you. In the application folder here, you can see the views. So we have the home that only renders home HTML that I will show you in a moment. And this message view that simply adds a message using the messages framework. Here's just a little trick to get a random message out of these files. Once the message is added to the message framework, it redirects to the home. And finally, let's see here, we render the messages here in this loop. So for message in messages, we create a toast. We include the message tags so that it has the right CSS class. I will show you that in a moment. And we include, of course, the message body. All of this is in a toast container as recommended by Bootstrap documentation. Then finally, here you can see a script tag where I run a little loop so that every toast that we created here is actually shown on the screen for 2 seconds. And this is straight out of the Bootstrap documentation, so I don't think we need to go there. Yeah, about the tags, to get the right colors, I configured here in my project settings, I configured the tags here. You can see that for a debug message, I'm going to use a light background, as you may have seen. Info will use the primary color for the background and white text, etc., etc. So that's how I get the right CSS class applied to the toast. Now let's see what the button is. The button emit message right now is an anchor tag with href that points to message. And let me show you that again with the DevTools and the Network tab. So every time we click on that message, on that button, it fetches message and then receives the redirect, and finally refreshes the home page, this time including the toast. Okay? Every time we click on that button, the whole page is refreshed, so it's impossible to have more than one message at a time. Now let's see how we can convert that project to use HTMX. First, we have to install the HTMX script. This is htmx.org, the official documentation, and here in the quick start I can see the script tag that we can use in our template. Let me put that at the bottom after installing Bootstrap. There we go. So that's the first step. Then we have to replace those links, those anchor tags, with buttons like this, and of course the href has to be removed and replaced with an hxget. This is an attribute that HTMX uses to say, whenever someone clicks on that button, I want you to do a GET request on that address. Let's see the result. Refresh, click on that button. Something worked, but obviously not what we expected. If you don't specify anything here, when HTMX finishes the GET request on the message page, it will take whatever HTML content is returned by the server and use it to replace the element where hxGet here. In our case, the button itself was replaced by the content of the home page, giving us this weird result. Let's change this. Instead of redirecting the browser to the home page, we should instead return an empty response, because there is not much we can do here. Instead of redirect here, let me return an HTTP response with a status of 204. 204, let me just remind you that 204 means no content. So that's the right status code when you don't return any content. As you may recall, I used this empty response in my previous video to hide the modal dialog. Let me show you. This is the code from the previous video, and if you remember, we were checking that a particular swap targeted the dialog. When the response is empty, we use that as a signal to hide the dialog. Well, in our case, we are just using this empty response just to say that there is nothing else to do here. Let me import that. So that's from Django HTTP response import HTTP response. There we go. Let's refresh the page. Try again, and now, of course, nothing happens. You can see that the 204 is returned, but unfortunately no message, which is to be expected, right? Now let's see how we can use HTMX to include those messages in the empty response and display them in the page. Let's go back to the previous video. If you remember, in the add movie view, whenever we add a movie to the database, I include this hx trigger header to the response so that it triggers some events on the front end. In that case, we used the show message event and included some payload here. This message was then received in the JavaScript side with HTMX on show message. Then we fetched the payload, which is the content of the message, to fill the toast body and then to show it on the screen. So we will do basically the same thing. Let me add the headers to the response. hx trigger. This header has to be a JSON string, so json.temp.s. This must be a JSON object, which each key represents the name of an event that will be raised on the front end. In our case, I think messages is a good name. Messages should be an array that contains all the messages. So let's do a comprehension with for message in messages dot get messages. Let's include the message content with message dot message and the tags with message dot tags, like this. Let me import JSON. Let's try and see the result. So here, let me hit refresh, clear that, click on emit message. We have our empty response. Let's inspect the headers. Yes, here is hx trigger with the messages. First message is here and the tags are correctly set. Now we have the backend working as expected. Let's fix the front end so that it listens to this messages event. Let's create a new JavaScript file in the static folder. Let's call this file toasts.js. In this file we'll do htmx.on. This will listen to an event. In our case the event is messages. This is the key in the JSON object that we send in htags trigger. When this event occurs, we want to, for now, just call console.log. Let's add some text here and include the payload, which is in event detail.value. Save. Of course, we have to import that file in our template. So script src equals toasts.js. This. Let's refresh. Let's see the console. We can see our messages here. Every time I click on emit message, we can see that it logs a new message. Now let's update the template. I'm going to remove this loop because message is not set in the context. So obviously we don't have a message yet. Let me mark this with data attribute so that we can easily find it in JavaScript. Let me call that data toast container. This I will name data toast template, and this data toast body. Okay, the goal of this data attribute is to easily find those elements in the DOM from JavaScript, so that we can, for example, duplicate the toast template, inject the text here in the toast body, and once the clone is operational, we can insert it in the container. So let me do just that. Let me write a create toast function that will receive a message here. This function will need the toast template, query selector. We'll find it thanks to the data attribute toast template, like this. We'll do the same for the container. Okay. Now from the template we can clone this to get a new element. Toast template dot clone node, yes. We have to say true here so that it does a deep copy and not a shallow copy. Then on this element I'm gonna remove the data attribute that identifies it as a template. So let me delete data set toast template, which will have the effect of removing this data attribute. When this is done, we can add the new element to the container. We also have to change the class name so that it includes the tags. Like this. and also change the body. Remember, the body is identified by data toast body, and we'll set the inner text to be equal to message.message. So now we have the toast element on the DOM. Only thing that remains is to ask Bootstrap to show it. So let's have a look at the documentation for the toast in Bootstrap. Here near the end you have the usage for the JavaScript usage, and you see that we have to create a new bootstrap.toast, pass the element and the options. Let's do that. Const toast equals new bootstrap toast. Yeah, the element here. Options was just, we can take the options we had here. So delay 2000. And now call toast.show to actually display the toast. Now let's call this create toast function. We have to do that for every message, and the message list is here in the message in the event payload. So let's do a for each, and for each value we'll simply call create toast. Now let's go back to our project, refresh the page. Something weird here because I forgot to remove that code that shows the initial messages. Okay, let's refresh. Here we go. And as you can see, since we are not refreshing the whole page, we can actually have multiple messages together at the same time. Now that we have the backend and the frontend working as expected, let's refactor this code so that it's more reusable. The main issue is in the view because it explicitly sets the hx trigger to include all the messages. So that means if we want to have messages in multiple views, we won't have to copy and paste this code. What we would need instead is something that automatically injects this header. That means we need something that runs every time a view returns something. And it turns out Django offers an excellent solution for that, which is the middleware. So this is the Django documentation for middleware. Let me read that out loud. Middleware is a framework of hooks into Django's request response processing. It's a light, low-level plugin system for globally altering Django's input or output. Well, in our case, that's going to be output. Let's create a middleware here in the project folder. Middleware.py. As far as I know, the easiest way to create a middleware is to import the middleware mixin, and this is placed in Django utils deprecation. Let me derive that class and let's call our new middleware htmx messages middleware. This derived from middleware mixin. Now let's override the function process response. This method will receive the request and the response. Now let me take the code that we have here to set the header like this and put it in the middleware. So let's do just that. Request dot head, no, not request, response dot headers hx trigger, and we assign it to this JSON string. Of course, we have to import get message, so that's from Django.contrib.messages import get messages import JSON, meaning we can remove that here, and that's all. All we need to do now is to inform Django that it has to use this new middleware, and this is done in the settings in the middleware option here. Let's add our new middleware. It's in demo project.middleware.htmx messages middleware. Let's see, let's check that everything is saved indeed. Let's refresh the page. Oh, I forgot. Yeah, at the end of process response, you have to return the response. There we go. And that still works without anything in the view, as you can see. Just returns an empty response, and the middleware injects the hx trigger header, and everything works as expected. Now, what if the view itself sets something in this header? Let's imagine that the header here, let's say we included the hx trigger for something else. For example, we could include foo, this has to be a JSON string, so foo bar like this. Let's see what happens. Fresh click here, it's in the network tab, only those guys. Let me see the last one, and we can see that hx trigger does include the message, however it does not include foo bar. So let's patch our middleware so that it supports this use case. Let me get the content for the hx trigger header like this. Get if this header is not none, well, in that case we will pass the JSON document inside of this. So json.loads hx trigger. So here hx trigger should be a dictionary, and if it hx trigger is none, well, in that case that's easy. We just have to initialize it with an empty dictionary. Now let's add our messages member in that dictionary like this. Okay, and override what's in the response hx trigger here. Okay, so take the old one. If the old one is not null, we pass it. Otherwise, we start with an empty object, then add the messages event with the right payload. Finally, we replace the existing hx trigger if it's present in the headers. Let's see if that works. Let me clear this list. Click on message here, and we can actually see foo bar and the messages. But that's not all. Let me show you in the reference page about the response headers. Here is hx trigger. So hx trigger has two forms. It can be either a simple event name like this, so only a string as the value of the header, or, as we already saw, a JSON object. Right now we handled the case where the view already sets a JSON object. Let's see how we can handle the case where the view uses hx trigger in this simple form. Let's change the view so that it uses this simple form. Foo here, So just a string. That means that the middleware will crash here because foo is not a valid JSON document. So JSON.loades will raise an exception. So let's do something different. If hxtrigger, let me do it here, is none, well, in that case we'll use this empty object. Else if hxtrigger starts with a curly brace, meaning it's a JSON object, then we can pass it. Otherwise, we'll assume it's a string, and in that case, we will create a dictionary with one member whose name is the former value for hxtrigger, so foo in our case, and set only true here as the value. This will have the same effect as just having one string. Let's see if that works. Message here, we do have foo equal to true, and the message, everything is working as expected. Now let me do some cleanup so we can reuse this solution in other projects. Let's create a new app. Start app. Let's call this HTMX messages. Let's move the middleware here. Can remove the migration that I won't use, admin also, models I won't use, test, even views. Only gonna use the middleware. Let's also bring the static folder with this toast file, and maybe also the template here. We can extract this template here and just do an include toasts.html like this, and that would be a new template, toast.html, that will just contain this. Now we have to tell Django to use this new app. So first the middleware should change htmx messages.middleware.htmx message middleware, and then also the app here, htmx messages. Let's see if everything works as expected. Forgot to start the server like this, refresh. It still works. Finally, if we want to support both types of messages, the one from classic Django code and the one with HTMX, we have to restore this loop here, messages. So for message in messages, let's take this template, and for this is not a template anymore. The body again comes message.message. The class comes from message.tags like this. Then we have to tell Bootstrap to show these messages at startup exactly as it was in the original project. So let's find the toast elements. This document.query selector all. We want to find all toasts that are not data toast templates. We want to specifically exclude that template. Then for each element in of toasts elements, we'll create a toast exactly as here and show it. Now let's try if that still works. We could use a message in the home view, for example, and message here well, let's use success or info. Hello from home view, like this, and refreshing the page should show this message. One positional argument. No, I forgot to include the request. Hello from view, and it also supports the old one. Every time we refresh here, we get the message. So now we support both types of messages. The one from the classic Django views that returns a full page, and also the one from HTMX that returns only a partial page or even an empty response, as we just saw. One last touch is to modify the middleware so that it only applies when the request was made with HTMX. And to do that, we just need to check that the request contains the header hx request. This is a special header added by HTMX on the client side to indicate that this request was made with HTMX. So if hx request is in request.headers, then we can apply all this logic. Otherwise, we just return the response unaltered. Let's do one last final check. And yes, that still works. Pretty cool, huh? I think you will agree that this is a simple and elegant solution. If you want to reuse it in your application, you only need to copy the HTMX message application from the repository. You'll find the link in the description below. You might be wondering, why is this not part of a library? And let me tell you what I think about that. This solution revolves around 3 files. The middleware, which is about 30 lines long, the JavaScript file, about 25 lines, and the template, about 15 lines. The problem is that Toast.js and Toast.html are strongly dependent on the CSS framework, which is Bootstrap 5 in this case. So we cannot include these files as part of a reusable solution. Now that lets us with only one file, middleware.py. Now, is it really worth reusing a library for a 30 lines file? I'm not sure. Personally, I see every project dependency as a liability, so every library that I use must bring a lot of value, and I don't think it cuts it in this case. Anyway, library or no library, you can finally use the messages framework in all your views, whether they use HTMX or not.